bless you as you do that. As we journey into Christmas time, and thank you for the songs we sang this morning just to remind us of where we're at. There are all these shows on television right now about all the Christmas stories, and we watch them every year, and every year they're a whole lot of fun just to watch again. And we inevitably get to one of the scenes where there's this person with this long grey beard, who's dressed up like a funny man in red, and he's wanting to give a gift to a child, and he's saying to the child, "Were you good this year, or were you naughty?" And were you good, or did you put chewing gum in your sister's hair, as we watched on a show the other night? If you put chewing gum in your sister's hair, that's okay. Maybe you'll get a gift, maybe smaller. But if you're really naughty, you get no gift. What does the Bible say about God's gifts to us, God's rewards for us? At the end of a busy year, at the end of a year that we've been journeying through, what does the Bible say about God's rewards for us? You might be surprised by the answer Jesus will give in this story today. You might not only be surprised, but you might also be challenged about where we are right now in our culture and community, the issues we're facing, and you might be encouraged to go on. Let's look at the life that God blesses as we read from Luke 19, verse 11. If this is your first time here, we are journeying through the book of Luke. We've been doing this for 2 years now, on and off, and we plan to finish it sometime in next year around about Easter time. But we're in Luke 19, and last week we saw the story of Zacchaeus who climbed a tree, and then Jesus went to his house, and Jesus said, "Hey, the Son of Man has come to seek and save those which were lost." But now he wants to speak into his culture, and he wants to speak into the space where he's at, and I believe exactly what he's saying here, he would be saying to us as well today, in some way or shape or form, and it's applicable to us. And I pray that you'd see this as we go through this. While they were listening to this, to Jesus talking about Zacchaeus and talking to Zacchaeus, he went on to tell them a parable. A parable is a story often just with one meaning. In this one today, there are two. Because he was near Jerusalem. Next week, we'll see more pointedly what that means. But he was heading to a place where history was focusing in on this moment. That Jesus, yes, he was born as a baby, but there was this important moment when his life would end and the implications of the world. But because he was near Jerusalem, and the people thought the kingdom of God was going to appear at once. They thought with Jesus going to Jerusalem, all their problems would be solved. The king has come. We will receive everything we've always been longing for, this gift of peace and mercy and justice. But Jesus was wanting to show them through the story, and is wanting to show us as well that there is a job to do. There is a job to do on this earth. So he tells this story in verse 12 of Luke 19. He said, "A man of noble birth went to a distant country to have himself appointed king and then to return." Jesus is speaking into a culture who in their minds would have heard stories like this. They were under Roman rule. And whenever there was a leadership change in Palestine, that leader needed to go off to Rome to be appointed as king. In 40 BC, King Herod went to Rome to argue his case and was made king over that area. And then he died, and then his son, Archelaus, was going to take over from him, but there was this standoff between him and his brother. So he went to Rome in 4 BC to ask for the kingship of Palestine. So there's the idea of somebody going away to be made a king they were familiar with. So he's speaking into that. Let's see how that influences the story going forward. So in the story, this man going away, he calls 10 of his servants in verse 13 and gave them 10 minas. I want you to notice that he gave them something that they needed to use. A mina was 3 months' worth of salary, right? So it wasn't a huge amount. And the text looks like that he chose 10 people, and he gave to each of them, he gave one of these minas. So not lots of money. And he said, "I'm going away. Use this until I come back." The word use this is like get into the trade. Get into the business of what we're about, of what I've taught you. Get into that business and do that way of trade until I come back. The word "until I come back" could be interpreted like that, until I come back, or it could also mean because I'm coming back. Remember, this is an English translation of a Greek text. So the word could mean both, and both of them are important. He says, do this until I come back, so there'll be a timing issue, but also because I'm coming back. Verse 14. But his subjects hated him and sent a delegation after him to say, we don't want this man to be our king. Going back to the history, Archelaus, when he went to Rome, nobody liked him. He wasn't a very good guy. So when he went to Rome, the Jewish leaders also sent a deputation along to Rome as well to plead the case in front of Caesar. And after he pled the case in front of Caesar, Caesar didn't make him king, but Caesar sort of made him just a regent or looking after not Palestine, but just an area of it. So they knew the story. They knew the story, but Jesus, there was a bigger issue behind this. Jesus was here going to Jerusalem knowing in his mind that many people hated him. Many people wanted a certain version of him. Many people wanted this person to come and solve all their problems. But many people hated him because he spoke the truth. Many people hated him because he hung out with people who weren't the popular people of that day. He hung out with sinners and tax collectors and all sorts of people that the respectable people didn't. And Jesus said some difficult things, and so they hated him. The context for this story is that Jesus is speaking to a group of people and to his disciples, knowing, I'm going away. The culture around you is not going to like you a whole lot. The culture around you is going to be against you. I'm leaving you with these gifts, but knowing that you're going to be using those with a culture that is going to stand against you. He's asking us to risk. He's asking them to risk. Many places in the world, when somebody chooses to follow Jesus, there's a risk to that. The way they live out their lives could be risky. And I believe in our culture today, there's a shift happening. We're beginning to see this. In the past, we were the good guys. I've spoken about this before. So 20 years ago and further back, we were the good guys. Churches were good in the eyes of the public. The last 20 years or so, they've been tolerating the church. But there's a shift in our culture where we've become the bad guys. There is a shift against wanting somebody to tell us what to do, God, that there's a God in heaven who has a claim on our lives. There is a shift against absolute truths that we believe in. We say, this is what Jesus said, so we believe that. We're going to do that. Yes, and interpret it properly and understand it properly and apply it properly. Yes, yes, yes. But we're going to live according to these things. There's a shift against that. And in Jesus' day, when the culture pushed against the requirements of God, we're finding our culture pushing against the church, Christians. I want to say to you that the opportunities we have in our culture today, we should embrace them. Because our culture is shifting from tolerating to being resistant. And in this story, Jesus is going to ask us, what are we doing with the things he's given us? We're going to absorb the culture and behave like our culture does. Or we're going to use what he's given us in the business of what he's called us to do and use it well. Culturally, it seems as if we've been pushed more and more to the margins. Culturally, we're wondering if the world is going to carry on like this, or what changes need to happen. Do we need to reject God and his people? Do we need to recreate the Garden of Eden in our own image? Also today, some of us are wondering if the world is going to end soon. And it may. In the Bible, there's always this tension between it could end soon or it could be a long time. And Jesus was exactly speaking into that space. So there's this tension right now. Is the world going to end soon? Or perhaps what's going in our world today you're asking the question, what should we do in response to the changes around us, to the response and the requirements from our government? So look what happens in verse 15. Jesus speaks now to his servants. He's given these 10 minas, 1 mina each to his servants, but the subjects, the general population, are against him. So verse 15. He was made king, however, and returned home. And I want you to, as we're reading this, to see the undertones of Jesus, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. What is this saying about Jesus? He was made king, however, and returned home. Then he sent for his servants to whom he'd given the money in order to find out what they had gained with it, in order to find out how they had done business with it, with what they were given. So he said to the first one, verse 16, first one came and said, "Sir, your mina, these 3 months' wages, I've earned 10 more. Look what he says. "Well done, my good servant," his master replied. "Excellent, awesome, way to go. You're a legend. You've been good. Well done." Look what he says now. He's not congratulating him for the amount he's earned. Look what he's saying he's congratulating him for. Because you have been trustworthy, verse 17. Because you've been trustworthy. The word is also faithful. You've done what I've asked you to do. Because you've been trustworthy in the small matter. Look, it's almost like this is just out of proportion. You've been trustworthy in 3 months' wages. I give you authority over 10 cities. If we would only see the implications of what we do on earth for later, like Jesus is, he's saying there's a big step here. You're no longer just a servant, you've got 10 cities that you have authority over. Faithful. The second one came, said, "Sir, your mina has earned 5 more. I missed this. I just thought, yeah, Jesus, this bloke is saying the same, this leader is saying the same to what he said to the guy before. But actually, one of the commentators I was reading as I prepared for this, he said, notice, the king didn't say, "Well done." He just said, "You take charge of 5 cities." It seems like the king knew that this man was a 10 mina man as well. That if he'd used what he'd been given, that he would also have done better with it. Perhaps he would have done better than 5. There are parables where Jesus says, hey, to the one person, the man gives 5 talents, to the other one 3, to the other one 1, and therefore, use what God's given you. But there seems to be an expectation here that the king or this person knew that this servant was capable of more. But he made 5. And so he was honored for that. Okay, you'll receive 5 cities. But I want you to see the master commends his servant for being faithful, the first one. And notice, secondly, that their reward is greater responsibilities, not privileges. Greater responsibility for the king. I was reading the other day that at Billy Graham's funeral, there were a number of people that spoke to that. This happened a few years ago. And one of them, a well-known presenter on NBC today, she said that she has eternal life because Billy Graham was faithful to his calling. Franklin Graham, Billy Graham's son, stood up and said that his father was fat. F-A-T, faithful, available, teachable. And he used what God had given him. Who knows if he used it to his maximum potential? We don't know. But he used what God has given him. He was faithful to that. The next servant comes along as the story progresses, and the situation or the mood changes. Then another servant came along. The word another means somebody of a different kind. Somebody who was out of place, really, when you compared him to the other 2. He said, "Sir, here's your mina. I've kept it laid away in a piece of cloth. I was afraid of you because you're a hard man. You take out what you did not put in and reap what you did not sow." So he's saying here to the master, to the king, he's saying, you know what, I know something about you. I've made up my mind about you. You're actually dishonest because you take what's not yours. You reap where you didn't sow. You're a hard man. I made up my mind, so I've hidden this because I didn't want you to be like that to me. He was playing it safe. And the reason I believe he was playing it safe, because you look at Jesus' response in the next verse. He was playing it safe. If we had to read into the context, he was looking at his culture and saying, the culture is against this king. Oh, I don't know if this king is coming back or not. I'm going to just bury this and just see what happens. I'm playing it safe. I'm not going to trust the master and what he said in the face of cultural opposition. I want to play it safe. So his master says this in verse 22. His master says, I will judge you by your own words, you wicked servant. Imagine the shame of calling him wicked in front of everyone else. He says, you're a wicked servant. He says that you knew, or you thought you knew, or you characterized me as this, that I'm a hard man, taking what I did not put in and reap what I did not sow. Verse 23, why didn't you then put my money on deposit? So that when I came back, I would have collected it with interest. In our Western world, we go, oh yeah, that's a good idea. No, actually in Jewish law, it was against the law to earn interest on money. So he's saying to this person, if you think I am a crooked person and judge me on being crooked, then why didn't you follow up on this knowledge that I'm crooked and earn some interest in a crooked way, at least? If you're fearful of me, truly, and if you truly thought I was crooked. This parable puts the blame solely on the servant. The servant had made up his mind about the king, about the leader, and so behaved in that way. Now, these two really difficult verses, and I think you'll begin to see how they work as we travel through. Verse 24. Then he said to those standing, take his mina away from him and give it to the one who's been given 10 minas. Verse 10 minas. And we go, oh, gasp, Jesus, be fair. You give him a participation award. Jesus is going, no. Even in our world today, we give the most resources, the best opportunities. We give to those who take opportunity and make the most of it. So he's saying, give it to the person who's going to make the most of this. Because, by the way, the person with the 10 minas, he kept those, right? He was going to keep using them, keep investing them, keep using them for the master. So the crowd themselves were shocked. They said in verse 25, sir, he already has 10. And he, the master, replied, I tell you that to everyone who has, more will be given. But as for the one who has nothing, even what they have will be taken away. This servant thought he was a servant and subject to the king. They thought he was serving him. The king is saying, no, you're not. You actually have been batting for the other crowd, for the other team. You've been barracking for the other crowd. You've been playing the cultural game. You didn't really trust that I was coming back and that I would ask you for account. This is a very difficult verse as we go to verse 27. But those enemies of mine, this is now going right back to the beginning of this parable, but those enemies of mine who did not want me to be king over them, bring them here and kill them in front of me. Our Western minds go to this thought. We go, doesn't Jesus say, love your enemy? Yes. Doesn't Jesus say, we should be generous and caring? Yes. But Jesus is also saying there will be a time of account. Firstly, in a Middle Eastern parable, and for those of you who come from the Middle East, you'll get this better than I do. I might even get this wrong. But in the Middle East, when you say no to somebody, it's not no as we know it in our language. For example, if I get told, Ray, you're fired, clear out your desk, by 5 o'clock this afternoon, you're out of here, I'll go, okay, I'll clear out my desk, by 5 o'clock I'm out of here. In that culture, when you say you're fired, you go, I'm in trouble, I better negotiate with my master. Nowhere in this parable does it actually say, firstly, that the king killed these people, so that helps us a bit. But that's not where it ends, because the Bible does talk about judgment and God holding humanity to account. What's going on here? What's going on for Jesus and the crowd? Firstly, Jesus had come to the nation of Israel, who God many hundreds of years before had blessed them with the law and with the light and with knowing who he was and how to lead other people to him and how to act with justice and mercy. And they hadn't done that. And so he was saying here, I'm coming to Jerusalem. This is reading between the lines. I'm coming to Jerusalem. You have the opportunity to truly embrace me as king. And if you don't, judgment awaits you. But they killed him. Instead of embracing him, they killed him. 40 years later, approximately, this is around AD 30, AD 33, we don't know the exact timing. But in AD 70, Jerusalem was destroyed, flattened. Thousands of people were killed by the Romans. Jesus had given them a 40-year warning on that. All through this parable, this king acts with graciousness and generosity and kindness, but he's also the king. He also has to act with justice. God's reward, friends, stands before us. And God will test us. There is a testing that Jesus is saying we will be tested in. We will be weighed, as it were. Our relationship with God will be checked. Is there this depth of relationship? Are we connected to Jesus? Are we abiding in him? Because we will bear fruit if we do. Secondly, there's a test of our motives. Are we doing this for our own glory or for God's glory? And there'll be a test of our real love for God and for people around us. See, there's some common misbeliefs that Jesus addresses in this. Firstly, that God is not concerned with how we use our gifts and talents. The second thing that there's a common misbelief in this is that God will reward everyone equally for what they've done, like a participation reward. And thirdly, we think that if we don't serve God with what he's given us, the worst that could happen is that we simply don't get a reward. This passage teaches us that we lose the opportunity to serve God in even a greater way in eternity. Yes, our salvation is not based on what we do for God. It's based on grace alone. But when God gives us a gift, and notice it's not up to us to manufacture this. He's given it to us. He's given us our life, our resources, our skills, our abilities. He's given them to us. He wants to know how we've multiplied that in the business of the Father, in the mission of God, making disciples. He will want to know how we've multiplied that. And how we multiply that will be different for different folks. Some will be there to pastorally care for others, that those who are doing it tough will find resilience and go on to reach others. Others will find ways to lead us into worship, that our relationship with God is solid and beautiful, and that we have the strength and energy to reach others for Jesus. Others will be out in the world doing that, making disciples. But I want you to know that God's reward is based on how faithfully we steward what he's given each of us. It's a tough message this morning. It's a tough message because Jesus has given us these gifts. He's given us everything we need for right now. Yes, I know we are distracted by what's going on in our community. But friends, we cannot avoid the argument to say that after 2 years we were so distracted that we show no fruit for God. What happens if it's 5 years or 10 years? Will we keep saying it's the culture or the community or something going on? I know some of you are doing it tough, and right now all you can see is just that, and I acknowledge that. And please don't misread me. I acknowledge you may be in such a tough space that everything else is just tough for you, maybe health-wise or financially, and just everything is going wrong. But if you're in that space all the time, there's something deeper that needs some healing. And Jesus wants us to be healed so that we can be productive. There is a certainty of the outcome. We know he's patient. We know he's king. We know he's coming back. And so the way we serve him, friends, will test all of those three things. The way we serve Him and multiply our gifts will show us how much we actually believe that He's King, that He's coming back, that He will reward us according to what we've done. So I simply want to ask you this question: are you a 10-mina steward? I don't mean compare yourself to someone else. I'm saying with whatever God knows you're capable of, are you living up to that? Are you planning for that? Are you pressing into that? Are you saying, God, help me do this work? I want to do it for you. You see, every disciple, friends, has the same opportunity to radically serve Jesus in the face of our hostile world right now, using your gifts, using your opportunities, using your resources to maximize your influence for God. So how do we do that? Firstly, how do we put this into practice? Firstly, start with faith. Now we're talking about faithfulness. But right now, if you're in the space where the world is crashing in around you and you can't see the direction of this, start with faith. Faith in God. Make sure that that's solid. Make sure your faith is deep and landed on the rock, planted on the rock, that God has got you. Start there. The way to overcome fear is faith. And you have to practice that. We have to put it into practice. Keep practicing that. Keep putting in the routines that keep you in that. If the routines of watching television, watching the news, or getting into discussions is putting you in a place of fear, I would say have a fast from that. Have a break from that. Put your faith. Ground your faith. Get some solid routines. Read the Bible. Pray. Worship. Get back into a place of faith. Because only from faith can we develop faithfulness. Secondly, as we develop faithfulness, take stock of your life. For those of you that have the energy to do this toward the end of the year, certainly at the beginning of the year, take stock on this last 12 months that's gone. And ask yourself, have you been faithful with the gift God's given you? What are those gifts? What are those abilities? In what particular way do you come to this world to influence others? Take stock of that. And ask yourself and ask the Spirit, what is God calling you to step up into next year so that you can be on the journey to becoming a 10-mina steward? Lastly, I want to encourage you, friends, that Jesus is coming back. Next week, we'll talk about that He is the King. This is the hope we have as Christians. We have a certainty in the words of the Bible. It gives us clarity for every day. We have this hope that we stand on. I want to encourage you that God has got you. This sermon is not meant to beat you down. The sermon is meant to say, God has given you these things. Allow Him to show you how to use them. He's given you the Holy Spirit. He's paid the price for you on the cross. He's broken the hold of sin and death on your life. He's answered, what does the future look like? He holds the future. He's given you everything you need. He's given you each other. To listen, to pray, to encourage, to strengthen, to in times, just speak the truth in love. That's called exhortation, using the Bible. And perhaps you felt that that's happened this morning. Perhaps the Spirit has taken it. Let's be encouraged that God has got you and got us this morning. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, this morning we thank you that your words just speak so deeply, deeply into our hearts. And this cultural story is so relevant even today. Help us, Lord, to not play it safe. Help us to be risky for your kingdom, Lord. This is a time when our world is looking to find certainty and hope, and they're looking in all sorts of places, Lord, blaming others for the lack of certainty and stability. But we have it, God. We have you. We have a hope. We have a future. You've got us. Lord, as we press into you this morning, as we come to the communion table, might you press into our hearts this morning all that you did for us on the cross. Might we make it our own this morning, the bread that was broken on that night that you were betrayed. You said, take this and eat this. This is my body. It's broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Lord, your body was broken so that we might be made whole, that we might find healing spiritually, emotionally, even physically and mentally, but that we might be made whole together, that we might discover that together we're a whole lot more like Jesus than on our own. And you help us to become more like Jesus together. Thank you that your body was broken to make this body whole, the church of God across the world whole and one. Thank you that your blood was shed, Lord, that just symbolizes this new covenant, this new promise, this new hope we have, that you do not desert us, that there is not this barrier between us and you anymore, that you've paid that price. We're washed clean. We don't have to be shameful servants who say, I can't even serve God, I'm not worthy of it. Yes, none of us are, but you have made us worthy. So Lord, this morning we drink deep of that truth. We take it deeply as we eat of what you've done for us.